My name is Marianne Caldwell. I say it now with intention, because for a long time my name felt like something I offered to the world without fully belonging to myself. It lived on paperwork, on invitations, on joint accounts and shared calendars. It was spoken in rooms where I felt present, but not entirely seen. Saying it now feels like reclaiming something small but essential. People say the word divorce like it is a verdict, like a final ruling handed down by people who were never there for the quiet moments, like a stamp pressed hard onto a life that once promised permanence. Divorce is spoken about as though it proves a lack of discipline, a lack of loyalty, a lack of strength. I believed that for most of my life. I believed it in the way beliefs settle quietly, formed by observation rather than instruction. In the way adults spoke about marriage as something you endure. In the way divorce was discussed in lowered voices, followed by sighs and subtle headshakes. No one had to say it directly. The message was everywhere. Marriage lasts. Love requires sacrifice. And if you are unhappy, that is simply the cost of being grown. Those ideas followed me into my marriage without resistance. They shaped my expectations before I even knew to question them. I live in Brooklyn, in a third-floor apartment that looks warm from the outside. The building is old, with narrow staircases and walls that hold the echoes of decades of other lives. In the afternoons, the light moves slowly across the floor, softening the edges of the room. Friends used to say it felt calm, safe, like a place where nothing could go wrong. I used to take comfort in that. I met Andrew when I was 29. He was steady in a way that felt grounding. He did not overwhelm me with grand gestures or dramatic promises. He was reliable, predictable, kind in a quiet, contained way. After years of emotional intensity in my 20s, that calm felt like relief. We dated carefully, thoughtfully. There was no rush, no chaos. When he proposed, it felt like the natural next step, not a leap. I told myself that was what mature love looked like. We married 3 years later in early autumn. The air was crisp. The leaves were just beginning to turn. I remember standing there, holding his hands, feeling a deep sense of certainty. Not excitement exactly, but security. I felt like I had made the right choice, like I had arrived somewhere stable. For a while, life unfolded gently. We built routines, shared meals, filled the apartment with furniture we chose together. We talked about the future in broad, reasonable terms. Where we might live next, what kind of life we wanted. It all felt sensible, balanced. Then something began to change, so gradually that I did not notice it happening. The conversations shifted first, not in content, but in depth. We talked constantly, but about things that required no vulnerability. Schedules, deadlines, responsibilities. We coordinated our lives efficiently. Our days ran smoothly. Our connection became practical. I told myself this was normal, that passion fades and companionship takes over, that this was the natural progression of long-term love. Everyone says marriage settles. No one explains how to tell the difference between settling and slowly going silent. There was no betrayal, no shouting, no moment of rupture, nothing dramatic enough to justify alarm. And that was the problem. Because when nothing is obviously wrong, you begin to assume the unease must be coming from you. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Andrew was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. I had finished washing the dishes, but I kept drying the same plate over and over again, just to give my hands something to do. I wanted to speak, not about anything specific, just to feel connected. But the words never formed. I did not know how to begin without feeling ridiculous. That moment passed, and I told myself it was nothing. But moments like that began to accumulate. Over time, I learned how to make myself easier. Not because Andrew asked me to, not because he demanded less, but because every attempt to explain myself seemed to end in correction rather than understanding. When I expressed discomfort, he offered logic. When I spoke emotionally, he responded practically. He did not mean to dismiss me. He simply did not know how to meet me where I was. So I adapted. I learned when to stay quiet, when to soften my words, when to swallow a feeling before it surfaced. That is how unhappiness often enters a marriage, not as pain, but as adaptation. You begin to adjust yourself to fit the shape of the relationship, until one day you realize you have changed too much to recognize who you were before. I stayed because nothing was technically wrong. We did not fight. We did not insult each other. We did not hurt each other in ways that would justify leaving. And because of that, I turned my discomfort inward. If nothing is broken, why am I hurting? That question haunted me. I started to doubt my instincts. I wondered if I was simply incapable of contentment. If my expectations were unrealistic. If wanting more emotional connection was childish. Every morning, I woke up already tired, not physically exhausted, emotionally worn down. It was the kind of tiredness that made even simple decisions feel heavy. The kind that lingered no matter how much rest I got. I stopped asking myself what I wanted, because wanting implied dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction felt dangerous. I learned to say I'm fine without thinking about it. The words came easily, automatically. They required no reflection. Friends would ask how married life was. I would smile and say it was good. And it was good, by every visible standard. We paid our bills. We showed up to family events. We maintained appearances. There was no crisis. But inside, something was quietly collapsing. I began to feel distant from myself, as if I were observing my own life rather than living it. I noticed how careful I had become, how much of my energy went into maintaining equilibrium. I stopped dreaming, not intentionally, it just happened. The future became a vague continuation of the present, predictable, manageable, empty of imagination. That realization frightened me more than any argument ever could, because arguments imply engagement. Silence implies resignation. I did not feel miserable in a way that demanded intervention. I felt absent, and that absence was easy to normalize. Everyone is tired. Everyone feels disconnected sometimes. Everyone sacrifices in marriage. These were the stories I told myself, but something in me resisted fully accepting them. There were moments when I was alone, walking through the city, when I felt a sudden rush of clarity, a sense of myself returning. My thoughts moved freely. My emotions felt sharper. Even sadness felt honest. Those moments made the contrast undeniable. If solitude felt more alive than togetherness, something was wrong. The question I had been avoiding finally surfaced clearly. Is this the rest of my life? Not said in panic, not said in anger, just quietly. I tried to push it away. I reminded myself of my vows, of the life we had built, of how much worse things could be. But the question remained, because it was not about Andrew. It was about me. It was about the slow erosion of my inner life. I stayed because leaving felt like failing. I had made promises. I had invested years. People believed in our marriage. What would it say about me if I walked away from something that looked stable? But staying meant continuing to betray myself, and that realization became unbearable. Divorce is not failing. Staying unhappy is. It is failing yourself when you dismiss your own emotional needs. It is failing your inner life when you choose silence over honesty. It is failing your future when you accept a version of love that requires you to disappear. When I finally allowed myself to consider leaving, I expected fear to dominate. And fear was there. Fear of judgment, fear of loneliness, fear of regret. But alongside the fear was relief. Not happiness, not excitement. Relief. Like finally admitting something you have known for a long time, but were afraid to say. The decision did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded slowly. Through small permissions I gave myself. Permission to trust my exhaustion. Permission to believe my sadness mattered. Permission to accept that wanting more did not make me selfish. The silence changed after that. It no longer felt suffocating. It felt honest. Divorce did not break me. It clarified me. It showed me the difference between endurance and alignment, between surviving and living, between staying out of fear and leaving out of self-respect. This is not a story about giving up. It is a story about choosing truth. And if you are listening to this while sitting quietly in a life that feels too small, if you recognize yourself in the careful shrinking, the constant tiredness, the way you have learned to minimize your needs, I want you to hear this. Your unhappiness does not mean you failed. Your desire for more does not make you ungrateful. And choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning love. Divorce is not failing. Staying unhappy is forgetting that you are allowed to want a life that feels alive. If this reflection felt personal, if it echoed something you have been carrying quietly, this channel exists for moments like that. For the feelings we struggle to name, for the truths that take years to admit. If you would like more stories like this, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Heart's Archive, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Until next time, be gentle with your heart. Choosing yourself is not quitting. It is finally coming home.